Good evening, everybody. Oh, come on, I know it's a bit nippy. I know it's a bit nippy and it's a bit damp, but we can do a little bit better than that, because I'm really pleased to see all of you. So, good evening, everybody. Good evening. That's a bit better. Nice, warm welcome here to Local and Family History at Leeds Central Library for our Engineering Leeds panel conversation today. It's an exploration of how African Caribbean men and women help to shape the Leeds engineering sector. It's brought to you by Smeaton 300, a creative programme for artists, scientists, engineers, designers and others, inspired by the work of Leeds-born John Smeaton, the UK's first civil engineer. Smeaton 300 is a signature Leeds 2023 project funded by Leeds City Council and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, this is your opportunity, if you've forgotten to turn your phone onto silent, to do so now. We'd appreciate that. We're not expecting a fire alarm test, so if one does go off, please, you'll be able to see the library's team here. They've all got lanyards on, and they'll be able to escort you and direct you calmly and securely off the premises. And just a little heads up that we are filming, we have photography as well, and we hope so that all these important conversations that we're having can be shared with as many people as possible, will be uploaded onto social media and to YouTube and so on. So let me introduce myself. How rude of me not to say so before. I'm Susan Pitter, born here in Leeds to Jamaican parents who came to the UK in the early 60s. I call myself, no I don't, I have been called a cultural heritage producer among the things that I do. That means that I've been blessed to deliver projects that tell the story, not just of Black history and Caribbean history and those contributions to our city, but by extension of the history of this city, because the two cannot be separated. Black history is our history. It's all our histories. So for that work, I listen to memories and collect keepsakes. I speak to those who have those memories and narratives. And I also have to research archives that are national, international, but also importantly, archives of our city. Libraries, museums, galleries, newspapers. Our city archives are the places, our city archives are the ways in which our stories are told. It is the story of this city. In there, if any archive that is a public archive is going to tell the story of our city, is going to tell a true and authentic story of our city, then it needs to include all communities. And so it has irked me somewhat that over the years, in all the work that I've been doing, one of the areas, and there are many, but one of the areas that has not been given the space that it deserves has been the stories of those men and women from the Caribbean who worked in engineering from the 40s, and just post-war we're focusing on tonight, pre-Windrush, and who shaped engineering in this city. The city was built on engineering. The city, amongst the things that it was built on, and the histories and the people that it was built onto. When Caribbean men and women answered the call to fill employment gaps after the war, in the NHS, in transport, in other sectors, but those are the ones that we see a lot about, aren't they? They were also called to fill the gaps in the engineering sector, jobs that Britain couldn't fill for love nor money. So the call went out to my parents' generation to say, come and help us to rebuild and to recover and to make Leeds a strong city, and ultimately the city that we have today. They weren't called because they were wanted, they were called because they were needed. And yet the contributions of those West Indian men and women who worked in engineering in Leeds is scarcely acknowledged in our archives, in our public archives. Their photos at work for the likes of companies like Yorkshire Imperial Metals, or Yorkshire Copper Works as it was more commonly known, Kirkstall Forge, Hunslet Engineering, Doncaster Monkbridge, West Yorkshire Foundry, to name a few, because there are many. They're a rarity. And so I've often asked myself, how come? How come when so many West Indians work for those companies right here in Leeds? It's hurtful too, because I am the daughter, the proud daughter, of a copper works man. Here he is. I think we can see there. This is my father on the British passport photo. I'll say that again. The British passport photo that brought him here in 1960, a member of the so-called Windrush generation. After some time on the buses, I've seen you smile. After some time on the buses, he joined Yorkshire Copper Works around 1964, along with many West Indian men who responded to the firm's job ads that year. Ads like this, and this is an actual ad, I think that was in the Yorkshire Evening Post and also in the Leeds United programme that year. As a child, I didn't understand much what my father did. I knew that he wore blue overalls. I knew that shift work exhausted him, and you'd better be quiet when he was on nights and sleeping in the day. I think that's familiar for many of you. He stayed with Copperworks until his retirement in the 90s. We didn't have photos of him at work. So his was not among the just 4 photos that I could gather for the Jamaica Society's 2019 Eulogy Project and exhibition that was right here on the city's first generation Jamaicans. And there are a couple that were shared with us of the late Mr. Sidney Robinson and Mr. Robert Crouch, who I'm proud to say is 95 years young and still with us. And it wasn't until last month that I finally came across more photos of West Indian men and women in engineering, including this one of my dad in 1970 for a Copperworks staff newsletter. I cannot tell you what that meant to find that picture. Tonight you'll see more on screen, most with thanks to the Copperworks and Monkbridge Facebook groups that have been a wealth of information, and I'm so happy that they're there, and I would encourage any of you to join if you have some connection with them. Many of West Indian men, and women who worked at engineering firms from as early as the 40s and 50s to those who joined later, some staying until retirement or closure of firms in the mid-2000s. And throughout, what I've tried to do is to name the people that we can. I am sure that there are people in here who know or will know some of those who don't have names. We cannot let them remain anonymous. They cannot be anonymous. They need to be recognised and acknowledged. And I hope that if you see anybody you recognise, please come and tell me so that we can identify them and give them the respect and acknowledgement that they are due. For those early arrivals, they answered job ads, they walked in the cold, and they were certainly not used to. Knocked on factory doors, went to factory gates, went down to what they called then the labour exchange, or they heard about jobs from friends and family. Someone had to come before, and that was the Caribbean World War II RAF veterans who had settled in Leeds in the 1940s after demob. And I just want to say this here. When we speak of Windrush, which is an absolute turning point for this country, we must also recognise that as well as those who came on Windrush, there were those who came before. Our history in this city and in cities up and down the country are hundreds of years old, but in terms of modern history, we were here before Windrush as well. And those are men like Glenn English, who became a respected civil engineering draftsman, and we believe the city's first black civil engineer. Errol James, who started off in engineering before becoming a university research technician and an absolute Trojan of community empowerment. Ashley Thomas, who works at Yorkshire Copper Works, and Charlie Dawkins, a leading aircraftman who was a superior welder with firms like Taylor Rustless for over 30 years, and Drawn. And here's the thing, despite their training, because after DMOB they were dispatched for training, many here in Leeds, and they were trained in the main in engineering fields, so they were really well qualified to enter the engineering sector. Despite that, they often faced discrimination in their search for work, but they persevered. Almost everyone in this picture worked in engineering, and many of them at Yorkshire Copper Works. And I want to thank Barbara Goodison, who is Tommy Thomas's daughter, kneeling on the right there, for letting us see this treasure of a photo. And sadly, most of them are no longer with us. And I want to just read a quick extract from a book. I'll tell you who the author is shortly. There was a gentleman stood by the door. He stopped me. Are you looking for work? Yes, I answered. I wanted to be cool, nonchalant maybe, but I was grinning from ear to ear. Where are you from, son? Jamaica. I just moved to Leeds, but I lived here for a while when I was serving in the RAF. He nodded. I see. What did you do in the RAF? What experience do you have? I was a motor mechanic. Actually, I first came to Leeds to do a 6-month engineering training course. There's a word for this, these happy accidents that almost seem like miracles to you, serendipity. I was getting desperate and dejected. If I hadn't joined the RAF, I'd have jumped on whatever job I could get if one became available to me. Now I didn't need to. Now the job that I wanted and was qualified for was calling me. Can you strip an engine? He asked me. Of course I can. It's putting it back together again, that's the problem. We laughed about this. This man had a small engineering workshop and he must have been impressed because he offered me a job on the spot. We got in his car and he took me to his workshop. That was my first job as a civilian in England, stripping tank engines for this gentleman and his small company, Commercial Engineers. He asked me if I knew any other men looking for a job, so I was able to get my brother and a couple of friends jobs as well. I was daydreaming one day while on the job. Factory work can be so monotonous. All of a sudden, I heard Charlie Dawkins shout, "Forward, Doc!" I sprang out of my daydream and did what I was told. The tank engine being carried over on the overhead crane shot over my head, so close I felt the breeze. If I hadn't ducked, it would have smashed my head open like an egg. The moral of the story is always to help your friends when you can. It will save your life one day. And that little recollection there was written by one who came before, and his son. Written by one who came before, who was one of that generation who had joined the RAF and come back on Windrush. He is the last survivor in this city who can claim to be an RAF veteran, as well as Windrush survivor. One of only 2 Windrush passengers left in the country. I am delighted that he's here today. Please put your hands together for Mr. Alfred Gardner. You want to stand up? Thank you, Mr. Gardner. I'm going to be testing your memory about those days and any secrets that you can tell us from those days later. But first, let's start with our panel, who are going to give us an insight into their time in engineering. In 1976, 16-year-old Derek Armstrong was one of a number of black teenagers on engineering apprenticeships in Leeds. He started his 4-year stint at Hunslet Engine Company, straight from Primrose Hill High School. After his apprenticeship, Derek studied accountancy before taking up roles in youth, probation, and housing services. He then worked as an arts project management and evaluation consultant before retiring last month. And then we have Heuben Condor, St. Kitts and Nevis-born Heuben, came to the UK in 1967, aged 14. In 1970, the 17-year-old started a 4-year craft apprenticeship in Smeaton. He progressed to management roles at companies including Yorkshire Switchgear and Yorkshire Imperial Metals, aka Copperworks, before leaving to work for Path Yorkshire and combining his design and engineering skills as an internationally respected carnival costume designer today. And next to me we have Des Walters, who was born in St. Kitts and Nevis and came to Britain in 1961, aged 10. On leaving school at 16 in 1966, he joined an engineering apprenticeship program at EPCO in Leeds before joining Doncaster's Monkbridge Iron and Steel Works in 1973. As well as studying, Des worked his way up to manufacturing engineer. He retired in 2008 after almost 4 decades in engineering, from the shop floor to a distinguished management career. Please welcome our panel this evening. Next slide, please. So these erstwhile gentlemen are not in this picture, but it is a picture around 1967 of a group of young apprentices. Many of you will be familiar with the late Hugh Gooding here on the left, and Clifton Johnson. I want to thank Kay Gooding Kershaw for letting us see this picture. And it was at the time when apprenticeships were very popular in terms of getting young men in particular into the workplace. So I'll ask the three of you, how did you hear about your engineering apprenticeship opportunities, and what prompted you to take them up? Let me start with Heuben.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. I wanted to work on the building site like my dad when I first thought about a career. But my dad discouraged me by saying it's really cold in this country, so I should try and find another job that might employ the skills I enjoy, which was using my hands. When I was at school, I looked at the career options, and there was an opportunity to apply for engineering apprenticeships, which I did apply for quite a few. I can remember applying for one at Jackson's Boiler next to Ellen Road. And I thought I did really well in terms of the interview. And when I left and got back to school, the career teacher met me outside of the building, and he said, "You stupid boy." And I was somewhat taken back, by that remark. And he said, "Well, you would have had that job. The only problem was you told the man you wanted to be a draftsman, and what he was looking for is an engineer to work on the shop floor." So from that point onwards, I thought, okay, if that's going to be your attitude, I'm going to look for a job myself. And the career teacher continued to pursue looking for a job for me. He then suggested I should be a tinsmith worker, which was making fabrications, which clearly wasn't what I wanted to do. So I continued to look for a job for myself, and I did find an apprenticeship for a company in Smeaton called Mintex Limited that made brake shoes and liners.
Okay. And Des, what about you?
Well, basically, mine started at school. We used to have craft classes, woodworking and so forth. And I found that I liked metalwork, a bit of filing, making things and so forth. So when the time came to choose a career, I thought I'd like to go into engineering. You mentioned Hugh there earlier on. Him and I were best friends sort of from day one, really. We met at Steinbeck Boys, and he was already in engineering, and he mentioned that they were taking on apprentices and so on. So I took it on myself and went down and had a word with Mr. Illingworth, who was the career trainer and so on at that point, and had a aptitude test, and I was told, yes, the job is yours.
Okay.
But he wanted me to stay on till I was 15 and a half, So I actually stayed on school 6 months longer than the norm, because you had, that time was, you finished at 15.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. And Derek, you started your apprenticeship a little bit later than Hubin, who started in 1970, and Des in 1966. Derek, you started in 1976. 1976.
That's correct.
Yeah. Tell us how you got into that.
Well, I left school, and I'd been encouraged during my careers interview to apply for roles as either a joiner or an apprentice mechanical engineer. There weren't many other options. I wanted to stay on at school, but unfortunately, the courses that I was interested in, I had O-levels in, they weren't running A-level classes. So I left school without a plan, or without a firm plan. I had this notional idea of applying to go to Kitson College to do radio and telecommunications, because I had a cousin who worked for BT, and I thought, that's a cool job. However, I need to ask you to cast your minds back to 1976 and that memorable long, hot summer. Candy Staton, Young Hearts Run Free was ubiquitous. Elton John and Keith, Don't Go Breaking My Heart. And I was free. And I needed money. And so to get money in those days, you got a job, which I did. Spray painting pub mirror frames on Buzzlingthorpe Lane. That job lasted 2 weeks. So I did what many of us did in those days. I signed on. There was a requirement to get benefits, though, that you were actively seeking work. And so it meant I had to have a careers interview. And I went in thinking that one afternoon, thinking it was just going to be a, average conversation. I could leave and I'd get my gyro. But alas, no. The careers officer said, I've looked at your qualifications. You've got quite a lot of technical metalwork, woodwork, technical drawing. Have you thought about engineering? And I said, yeah, I thought about it, but that's not really what I'm interested in. And he said, well, there happens to be a vacancy at Hunslet Engine Company on Jack Lane. Do you know where that is? And I thought, Jack Lane? I do. Because I used to attend Jack Lane, which is on the south of the city, when I used to do gymnastics at the Leeds Athletic Institute. So I thought, oh, well, I know where that is. So I got a bus, and I went up after running home and putting my tie on, smartening up. And I got to this Victorian building that was very, very foreboding. I thought, oh, I'm a bit scared to go in there. I walked in anyway, and at the reception there was a gentleman called Mr. Colbeck. He was a fairly typical Yorkshireman, quite short, ruddy, but very, very outspoken, big voice. And he said to me, what's your interest in engineering? And I says, well, I'm good with my hands. He says, that's a good start. He says, I want you to take a quick test. Follow me. And we went upstairs, and as I was following him, he says, do you like cricket? And I says, yeah, I like cricket. My dad's really interested in cricket. He says, the West Indies are playing England at Headingley today. I wish I was there. I said, oh, my dad's there. And he says, his face lit up, and he says, he likes cricket, does he? And I says, yeah. So I had to do an aptitude test, a number of multiple choice, arithmetic, and some open-ended maths. And as I'm completing the test, he looks over my shoulder and he says to me, you might want to take that tool and carry it across there. And I says, oh, thank you. Anyhow, he says, we'll have a quick chat. And the interview was mainly about cricket. Subsequently, he said to me, what are you doing on Monday? And I says, well, nothing. He says, well, I want you to start. And that was my introduction to engineering.
So I'm going to test you now. Can you each remember what your starting pay was? Des?
Oh, yes. £3, 7 shillings and 4 pence.
Derek, can you remember?
£16 and 40 pence.
Okay.
And mine was £8.50.
Mr. Gardner, dare I ask if you can remember what yours was in 1948? 2 and 4 pence an hour. There you go.
Sorry.
Say again? That was the first offer. There you go. And you used to take home about £2 a week. Yeah, just over, sorry, beg your pardon, just over £2, £2 a week. So let's move on from your apprenticeship days, and I'm sure that was a bit of a shock to the system, working in engineering, and I know that you all went on into, well, not all of you. Spoiler alert, not everybody went on into engineering. But let's just speak for a minute about your progression after that, if we can give a potted history of your progression in engineering and what companies you went on to. Let me start with you, Des, because your engineering career turned out to be, after your apprenticeship, a lifetime career, didn't it? Tell us a little bit about your progression, specifically at Monkbridge.
Yes, well, as I said earlier, I did a 5-year apprenticeship at EPCO. We did made trolley jacks and sort of equipment, pumps and so forth for the fire service and the automotive industry. And after my apprenticeship, I stayed there a couple of years and got fed up. In the meantime, I sort of got married and so on, and started...
Can I just say that's not a good reason to get married? Where is she? Sorry.
started looking for, more money and so forth. I'd already bought my own house and so forth at that time. So looking around, and anyway, my neighbour, I remember him now, his name is called George, lived next door to us. He worked at Monkbridge, and Monkbridge was like pretty much a closed shop at that point. It was recommendations when you were allowed in. Anyway, we got talking, and he said, oh, there's some vacancies come up, and I'll put in a good word for you, like. So he did. And I was told about it. I went down and got an interview, got a test and so forth, and started there as a trim tool fitter. We used to set up, one of the jobs I did was set up all the machinery for making the blades and trimming the blades and so forth. You guys probably saw that program on Sunday night where the ladies were using those presses.
Oh, Lenny Henry's Three Little Birds, which showed how West Indians were employed in Dudley in an engineering factory. Found it really useful for tonight's show. Do
well,
black spiral, yeah.
that's the sort of thing that I did initially, setting up those presses and the tool sets and so forth initially. And I did that for a number of years. You know, also used to maintain not just the trim presses, but the actual power presses that actually stamped out the blades, you know. Well, I got to a point where I was getting a bit fed up.
Again.
You know.
Watch him when he gets fed up, okay?
I suppose you go through these phases, don't you? And one of the reasons why I was getting fed up, I hated nights.
Yes.
Because I had to work nights. And when I started at Monk Bridge, standard week there was like 54 hours. That was my standard week. Had to do 2 weeks days, 2 weeks nights. Money was good, like, you know, but the shit pay in terms of basic. Excuse the expression.
That's one way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah. So you had to put in the hours. Yeah. So anyway, I was getting fed up and thinking about moving on, so I started to study. Mm-hmm. I did Open University, did Science Foundation course and so forth, you know, and got through that. In the meantime, Monk Bridge had its own apprenticeship system. I was already qualified when I went in, and you couldn't get into Monk Bridge as a young man unless you were 21 because of, you know, the type of work that it was, quite dangerous and so forth. And basically what we did then, after studying and so on, the career guy who used to do the apprentices used to pop into our shop, and he caught me reading this book. You know, I says, what you doing this? I says, oh, I'm studying Open University. He says, oh, is that what you really want to do? I says, yeah. He says, well, all right, we'll take over. So he actually recommended me and took over the payments on my university fees and so forth. Yeah.
So Monk Bridge supported you to study, what did you study? Was it engineering related? What?
Manufacturing system engineering with management. Ended up with a B.Eng honours degree. So that took me 5 years part-time.
And at the same time working at Monk Bridge?
At Monk
Shift
Bridge,
work
yeah.
at Monk Bridge?
Yes.
I think that deserves a round of applause in itself, doesn't it? And let me just ask, for those, because for those of us who know about these engineering companies, we kind of assume that everybody knows what they made. What did Monk Bridge make?
Primarily aerofoils for jet engines. Mm-hmm. We the forgings for fan blades, vanes, everything that went into an engine.
Right.
That wasn't the only thing as well. We also did prosthetics, you know, hip bones and so on in the medical industry.
Right.
That was later split off and sent to Sheffield. You know, I used to set up for those sort of things as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Huben, you spent a good amount of time in engineering at Switchgear, Yorkshire Switchgear, and then Copperworks. But it wasn't your entire career. But tell us about your progression in engineering.
Sure. I did my apprenticeship at a company as I said earlier on, in Smeaton called Mintex, and I originally started as a craft apprentice. I didn't have the requirement in terms of qualifications to be a technical apprentice, which is what I really wanted to do. So whilst doing the craft apprenticeship, I was doing additional maths at college. And one day it was discovered I was doing this additional maths. And my manager said, well, why are you doing that? I said, well, because I want to be a technical apprentice. And lo and behold, he said, well, if you're that keen, what we'll do is we'll put you on to be a technical apprentice. And but you have to stop doing maths in it because you couldn't do both the technical apprenticeship at college as well as extra maths. So I said, okay, well, that sounds fine, which is what I did. And there was a guy named Eddie Pope, a very smartly dressed manager And one day he was looking at my performance well, he just invited me, first of all, to his office. And he said, look, what I want to do is I want to offer you an apprenticeship as a technician. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So he said, well, look, what it is, currently you're on the shop floor. I'm offering you the opportunity to come on to the technical apprenticeship, which means you're now going to be working in the office. He said, the job is not the best. It was just costing us an estimating engineer. He said, but once you get into that field, it's easy to move around and do other things within the technical field. I thought, great. So I accepted that position. But I must tell you this story about when I was leaving the shop floor. There was one guy who, from the get-go, from the very start, said, look, I don't want you to work with me because one of the things I had to do was work with other engineers in their various positions. And he'd made it clear that he's not going to work with me because I was black. I said, okay, that's fine. At least I knew who he was. That wasn't a problem. So I just simply avoided him. But when I was leaving the shop floor to take up the position as a technical engineer in the company, and by the way, technical engineers then only worked 30 hours, so 35 hours opposed to 40 hours. I was getting an increase in salary. I wasn't wearing overalls anymore, smartly just going to work. Anyway, this guy said to me, can I have a word with you? So I said, yeah, sure. And that was the first time he actually spoke to me, and he said, I understand you're going to work in the offices. I said, yes, I am. He said, well, what this country needs is good engineers like you on the shop floor. I said, you're absolutely right. And what this country needs even more is engineers like me in the offices. So I said, thank you very much and goodbye. And that was the last I spoke to him. Anyway, whilst working in that company, at the time, you weren't allowed full pay until you were 28 years old. So although you gone through the apprenticeship, you still had to sort of like do all these extra years before you get onto full pay. Once I was just about 25, the union had negotiated for the age to drop from 28 to 25. Now, during that particular period, I had already worked myself to be on the top grade of pay. So it now means that, but that wasn't a problem because I wasn't on full pay until I was 28. So when the unions negotiated for it to be dropped down to 25, it suddenly meant I was going to be the highest paid in the department. Well, my boss said, no, that can't be done. He said, you're going to have to drop a couple of grades so you're in line with everyone else. I said, no, that's not correct. That's not fair. So I went to his boss and made my complaint, and his boss agreed that, I was right, I should be on full pay, the maximum pay in the company. And I thought, well, if that's what my manager thought about me, then I should really leave. And so I applied for 2 jobs, which I was successful at. And one of them was working for Copper Works. So I then left and went to Copper Works to work. And that was quite an interesting experience working there because, again, I was the only black guy working in the offices. Most of the other black people were working on the shop floor doing various production work. And I can remember one black guy on the shop floor was saying to me, oh, it's all right for you, working in the offices. You have an easy job. And another one of his colleagues, another black guy, said, well, don't be criticizing him because he's the one who's been to college and worked and has got a good job in the office. So you should really look at him in a positive way, not in a negative way. So yeah, I worked at Copper Works for quite some time. And then I moved to another company in Bradford called Microvitech. They were making computer monitors at the time. And I went there as a work-study engineer. And my job then was to look at the way things were being manufactured and look at the processes, time them, and so on, and then rearrange the way things are done and try and get an increase in output. And one of the production lines, I looked at the way it was being manufacturing was being done, and I got a 30% increase in output just by simply rearranging it. Now, the union wasn't happy about this idea of the same number of staff producing another 30% output. So there was quite a big hoo-ha about it, and then there was some agreement that we'll have a 28% increase and not 30% increase because they won't be seen to be given something. Now, after that particular event, I was then offered a position as a production manager as a result of my understanding of the processes and so on. And I quite enjoyed doing that. But when I first took the job over, all the staff decided to stop working overtime, which meant that production suddenly went down because I took over as manager. Finally, there was another white guy who was in line for the position. And then suddenly there was this young black guy came in, no experience in electronics, because I came from a mechanical background. And so they resented the idea of me being production manager. Anyway, nonetheless, I carried on. I then rearranged the whole production process. I also promoted a couple of black women as well to be line managers. And they helped me to get the production output. And there came a point then where I was getting the same amount of output in normal hours as the company was doing with all the extra overtime. And so it began to hurt the people who had refused to work overtime for me in the first place, and they began to come back and say, well, can we work overtime for you? And I said, no, only unless it's necessary. So I then began to... I bet
you were incredibly popular.
I know, but you know, it's important to understand that as a young black guy working in that environment, you're quite singular. I mean, for example, do you know the company I worked with in the first place, I was just one of two black people working in the company with 800 staff. So again, you know, that was quite difficult for me to sort of be comfortable in. But it was nice to be able to leave and then go back to Chapeltown and hang with my family and my friends and maintain that culture, so to speak.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, but
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but then I then did production management in another few companies, and then in my last job I worked for Path Yorkshire as a chief exec of the company. And again, that was really interesting doing that because what I was able to do then was bring all my experiences as someone who's been through the system and understood the subtleties about the way black people are discriminated against. Because no one ever sort of say, oh, well, you're not going to get the job because you're black, because that's not the done thing. But clearly, there are very subtle ways of ensuring that you didn't get the job. So when I became chief executive of Path Yorkshire, I was able to speak to companies and almost basically break down that barrier and said, no, you've got to give people a chance, you know, to get some training so that they can get the experience to apply for the work. So I really enjoy that particular element as well.
Perfect. I think one aspect of Huben's work that he hasn't mentioned, but I think he's probably most well known for, is being an internationally respected carnival costume designer. We may not have time to go into it. That's an idea for another panel, Smeaton 300. But I remember a very, very, very long time ago introducing the Carnival Queen shows at the time. And I remember the gasps and the shock, in a good way, of this costume that was a sea anemone that opened up and transformed. It was an iconic moment in the history of Leeds West Indian Carnival. And what people probably don't click is that Huben's costumes that move and have movements and open up and do all sorts of fandangles and wizardry are because of his engineering and technical background as well. And so there's that sense of combining art and that real talent and culture as well as the engineering side of things. So thank you, Huben.
That's easy.
Yeah. Now, so staying not quite as long as the others in the world of engineering.
Sorry.
Derek, but nonetheless, an experience that I think it's important to look at. Derek, you left after your 4-year apprenticeship. Tell us about that. You left engineering altogether, not just the company, but engineering altogether. Tell us about that and what was going on in the world in Leeds and at that time.
Yeah, so, I mean, I started my apprenticeship. Hunslet Energy Company had an international reputation for manufacturing locomotives, steam, diesel, electric, and they had been developing apprentices for many, many years. It was quite prestigious to get an apprenticeship at Hunslet Energy Company, and I was one of 22 that was set on that year. I was the only person of Caribbean background, and there was one other Asian guy. And if I'm perfectly honest, things were tough. I mean, I'd been brought up in Harold's and Chapeltown, and I was traveling across the South Leeds. And this was the time of the 70s, and the NF were rife, and you knew you were a person of colour when you lived in Leeds. I didn't really enjoy my time with my fellow apprentices. I mean, they were quite racist in the early days. And I remember going home to my brother and saying to him, you know, I can't take this anymore, you know. There's quite a lot of offensive language being used. It seemed to have been colluded with by some of the management and supervisors in this centre, and I kind of didn't like it. You also would have been summarily dismissed if you'd retaliated to some of these things. And I remember my brother saying to me at the time, he said, you know, you can't allow people to take liberties with you. You're going to have to draw a line, you know, if you're going to continue there. So in those days, I was a budding Rastafari. I used to wear a little crown and I had my little locks. And as an apprentice in a training centre, you got your lunches subsidised, and we used to queue up for dinner tickets. Before I go into that area a bit more, I mean, what we did in the training centre was, you had the basics of engineering. So you did electrical and electronic work. You did forging and welding, you did machine work, and you did fitting and assembly. So all of the aspects of basic engineering. I got into work that day and basically made a statement. I said, listen, the next person that takes my hat off and laughs, it's going to be me and them outside. And there was a chap called Terry who was the biggest fella in the place, and he just walked up to me and he took my hat off and dropped it on the floor, stood at it, and he says, what about you, black man? So I said, right, when we finish work, we'll have a conversation outside. Apparently these conversations took place in a little underground subway which connected Jack Lane to Leake Street Flats, and I thought to myself, what the hell have I done here? And the only other fella that I knew in the company was a chap who had been sat on a year earlier. They seemed to do a thing whereby they'd appoint one black apprentice with every cohort. Something that was also magnified when I went to Kitson College, because all of the engineering companies sent their apprentices to be trained on day release. And, Bambo, Copperworks, ECGB, all of the companies sent their apprentices. And you could pick out all the black ones, because there was one for each company. We can discuss that a little bit later if we've got time. Anyway, going back to my...
If they don't throw us out.
My scenario, So I asked this chap if he could provide a little bit moral support whilst we had this altercation, which we did. And it was done with, and the chap was off work for a little while, and I went into work. And this thing about being at college, he was in my group, and of course Terry and I had to rub along. And whilst there was initial enmity, he wasn't racist really, but he felt as the cock of Coburn High School, he had to man up. And that was the last of my travails. I never had any more problems in training centre, because me and Terry were like that. And I can look back now and think, whilst we came from different places, we had a lot of things in common, and he was a nice guy, and I was a nice guy. And I said that when I went to his wedding and spoke. But it was a difficult time because you didn't feel particularly welcome. The unions, I mean, in those days, all engineering companies, you had to join the union. And the union was probably the biggest resistor to a diversification of workforces in those days, because they would support this premise that, if a member of your family worked in a company, then their kids, nephews, uncles, sons should get first crack. And they were really, really threatened by the idea of black and brown people coming over and taking their jobs. So it was difficult.
Okay.
Do you want to know why I left?
Yeah, if you could tell us in a little nutshell.
In a little nutshell. So I was a pretty good engineer. I went on to work on the shop floor, and I was a precision fitter. I used to do a lot of the assembly work. And I had aspirations to work in the drawing office and become a draftsman. And when I did my initial qualifications, which was City and Guilds 1 to Technician Level 1 and Technician Level 2, you had to, before you were classed as an engineer, you had to have at least done ordinary national certificate or have an undergraduate degree. And I wanted to study for my ONC, and they said, no, you can't do that. And I said, well, how am I going to work in the drawing office? He said, you're not going to work in the drawing office, you're going to work on the shop floor. And I says, thank you, but no thanks. And I left.
And you went on to bigger and better things for you, and just I'll put it in the nutshell. But in terms of community service, and you studied accountancy, went into the community service side of things in the work that you did, and so on, which was a huge departure from that. But it's nonetheless something that we can all be proud of, including yourselves.
There were lessons that I took away with me from my time in engineering. Project management was ingrained in me, and so understanding a flow, a process, was really important, and it had transferable applications to all sorts of things. And also understanding and being able to get along with a bunch of people. We're all more similar than we are dissimilar. And it's finding that commonality and giving the time to find that commonality. And I think that's something that has been with me in all of the roles that I've done.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you've all touched on relationships and your experience there, and the treatment, and in particular the union experience as well. And that was something that obviously it didn't make a difference whether you were in the offices or you were on the shop floor as well. I want to ask Mr. Freeman, Mr. Henry Freeman, who is here with us, part of that first generation, who came from St. Kitts and Nevis, and he came over and also worked in engineering. Mr. Freeman, can you tell us a little bit, if we can get the mic over to him, tell us, Mr. Freeman, a little bit about your experience at Kirkstall Forge, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, I worked at, my name is Charles Freeman. Yeah, I worked at Kirkstall Forge for almost 25 years. I retired in 2003. My job in engineering at Kirkstall Forge, I used to work at the called small component, drilling. I used to make roller balls for lorries and cars, for the inside the wheel. And my first experience when I went there, I said it's a heaven from West Yorkshire, because I used to work at West Yorkshire. I worked there for 1 day, and I said, I'm not going back.
That's West Yorkshire Foundry.
West Yorkshire
yeah,
Foundry.
yeah. That was known for being particularly hard, grueling, punishing
It's
work.
not hard, it's deadly.
There you go.
It was deadly. Anybody who here now work at West Yorkshire will tell you what sort of place that was. It was dusty, heavy, and dangerous. I worked there for 1 day. When I went home, my wife had to feed me with my dinner. I couldn't put my hand up like that. No, I said no. And when I went to Coxwell Forge, it was so different. And I met a lot of black people at Coxwell Forge as well. They used to work in the stamp shop, which is a very dangerous place as well. But if you know what you're doing, it's not dangerous.
I think we've got some slides of folks in engineering, including some of these are copperworks, but further on there are some who worked at West Yorkshire as well. Sorry, Mr. Freeman, you were saying that it was really, really, really hard and dangerous work, wasn't it?
Yes, in West Yorkshire.
So that one there is Mr. Sidney Robinson, and that's at West Yorkshire. If you can see it there, of pouring the molten metal, and how just the conditions that people had to work in.
Susan, can I say something? 'Cause
Sure.
My father worked at West Yorkshire Foundry
Yes,
for
yeah.
17 years. And he described some of the toughest and most difficult circumstances that they had to work under. I mean, another feature of working at West Yorkshire Foundry, I mean, they made engine blocks.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Jaguar, British Leyland, blockheads, and
Yeah, most of the manufacturers, motor manufacturers.
It was, and those furnaces ran 24/7. And what my dad used to say was, there's plenty of work here for if you're prepared to work shifts. And that's when my dad was a stonemason by qualification. He came over this country in 1962, and he couldn't get a job doing what he was trained to do. But he got a job as a semi-skilled labourer at West Yorkshire Foundry. And he says during the shifts, because he used to drive, and again the shifts were 2 till 10, 10 till 6, and 6 till 2. And very often you couldn't get public transport to get to work. So my dad, as a car driver, used to pick 4 or 5 of the fellows up, a couple in Chapeltown, one in Hyde Park, and one in Burley. And, he'd take them to work every day. And nearly all of the people who work shifts were from the Caribbean.
Yeah. I want to ask Mr. Freeman again. Tell me about what it was like to work on shifts in those days at Kirkstall Forge.
Oh, well, I worked Monday to Friday, and Saturday you could go in and do 4 hours with time and a half. So that was very good. That helped make up your money. But the reason why I didn't love Kirkstall Forge was the people there, the management as well. They understood what we black people from the West Indies, because we haven't got any engineering firm in the West Indies. So when we came here, we have to learn all the skill here. But it wasn't too hard for me to pick up the skill, because I used to do before I went to Coxwell Forge, I used to do papering and all them sort of things, cut carpet and all that. So it's part of what I was doing in Coxwell Forge. So I enjoyed the work there until I retired. I have some good friends there as well. But one thing I had an accident there with the radial drill, a small component, and I lost this middle finger on the right hand. But I still love it. It was the best job I ever had in England. Thank you.
you know, you know, we are children of engineering men, and one of the things that I think we kind of take for granted, it was a means to an end. You know, they were feeding families, looking after, raising families, raising us to be who we are today, and working for that reason. And it was hard, and it was punishing, and it was grueling. And people weren't always acting in the humane ways that we expect humans to treat each other. But what I'm really glad for, and I found this out when I was doing some research into Copperworks and from the Copperworks Facebook page as well, is that there were some good relationships and some friendships were forged as well. Excuse the pun. As well, and I think that's so important as a way of coping and as a way of just being seen as a decent human being as well. I mean, we can go through some of the slides as well. And when we've spoken here, we've spoken about mainly men in engineering. But there were women that were working in engineering, mainly actually at Doncaster Monkbridge. There were a lot of women that were working at Monkbridge. Hopefully, we can get some more names added to these as well. Des, tell us a little bit about some of the areas that the women that were working at Doncaster Monkbridge. This is Yvette Small on the left, who has become an absolute legend and an icon, actually, in terms of community leadership and so on. And she started out in the typing pool at Monkbridge. But tell us about some of the work that women were doing. And although it may not have been that grueling work in that respect, it was still exceptionally important, wasn't it, in terms of the end product? Oh, yes.
We had, hundreds of black women work there over the years. And basically, they were in the inspection areas, and they used to monitor the aerofoils for dimensional quality. You know, so the 100% checks, every blade was checked 100%. Platform faces, caudal width, that sort of thing, and also mark up the blades for any defects, because the how shall I put it, the surface quality of the blade, we were working to something like microns,
right?
You know, which is very highly polished. There were no defects, no score marks or anything, and the ladies would look at the blades. You know, if it wasn't up to quality, mark it up, send it for rework and so forth, and it wouldn't get past them until it met the required quality.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point that out, as well as that heavy lifting, literally heavy lifting, in terms of what those women were doing, certainly at Doncaster Monkbridge. What they were doing was ensuring the safety of people that were flying in the aircraft yes. that the engines went into. And I think it's an area that we don't recognise, we don't talk about as much as we should. Idea for another project there, Smeaton 300. And,
can I just point out?
Yeah, sure, sorry, Des.
In terms of the inspection process that the ladies did, once they were packed and left Monkbridge and identified, the aerofoil wasn't actually touched again by people down the line. Mm-hmm. The only thing that was done was the root block was machined up, right. So that it would fit in the engine and cut to width and so on. But the actual surface quality and so forth, that was a finished component when it left us.
Right.
You know,
right.
So everything had to be correct.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a huge responsibility. Yes. Thank you for now for that. I really want to ask a couple of questions. We have we don't have much time left, but I would like to open up the floor for any questions that anybody might have or any comments. I'm going to ask you this. Please keep it as brief as possible. I'll say it again. Please keep it as brief as possible in terms of your question, and also if you have a comment as well, we'd love to hear it. If you raise your hand or stand, and then our mic carrier will be over. And then there's a gentleman over there as well.
Hello, my name's Sheila Freeman. I'm Henry's daughter. To all of you, considering the issues with racism and the environment in engineering, did any of your children ever, talk about any ambitions to go into engineering? And if so, did you discourage or support them? Well, any of you?
In my case, I don't think my son was interested in engineering. He was more into music and still is today, so he follows that path.
Mm-hmm. How about you two?
Well, my youngest son works in civil engineering. He works for the local authority, so he's following his own path. I've not encouraged nor dissuaded him on that.
Okay. And Hubert?
No, not my son was not interested.
No. Okay.
The only reason why I asked that question, because obviously when Derek was talking about the 70s, I'm 53 nearly, and I know the times. I went to Steinbeck High, suffered a lot of racism there. One of only a few black people in the top sets, and the teachers would say, anytime racism, just ignore them, things that wouldn't be said now. Sort of have a thick skin and all of that. And so we are a product of our lived experience, so that's the reason why I was asking if you would support or discourage, but thank you. That's great.
Thank you. And over here, there's a question over here.
It's linked to the comment about the crossover of the carnival, and I wondered whether, we talked about the racism and all of that, which is well rehearsed, but I'm also interested in positive impact that kind of movement to the Caribbean came and how that influenced the culture within the. So if any of you had anecdotes in that direction, in terms of how the culture within the sector and all that changed because of the workforce change. Thank you.
You mean in the engineering companies themselves, or broadly speaking?
This concept of the engineering things, and so do you have positive stories as well about things that you did or people around you, or the few people around you did to make a difference with that?
Okay. Just a brief one, because I really wanted to say this. I mean, when I started in engineering, the process of deindustrialization had started. It wasn't too long after I was enrolled that Maggie Thatcher's was agitating, and there was pressure on the mines. Collieries were closing, shipyards were closing, car manufacturing plants were closing, things were changing. But before they took set, I did have the opportunity to work on probably the most famous locomotive in the world, which was the Flying Scotsman, which came in for, to service its boiler. And yes, I did a bit on it.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask for another question. Anybody else have any? There's one here at the back here.
Susan, sorry.
Oh,
just
sorry.
About,
whilst they're going over there.
Sorry, just about the influence. I mean, one thing I can say about the influence of Carnival, on my career was that I invited people who I worked with who'd never sort of been in touch with many black people. I invited them to Chapeltown, to a carnival. And one of the comments I remember one of them saying is this: now I know what it feels like to be in the minority, because for them it was the first time that they were, okay. Yeah, they were in a group, they were in a large number of people, and they were definitely in the minority. So I think that was something I think some of my colleagues learned. Yeah.
Thank you.
What does that say there?
Question over here.
So it's kind of connected to Carnival, I guess, as well. I'm a history teacher, and last year I was teaching Carnival to my students and was showing videos from the 70s, and it was showing how it's a whole range of people, so not just the Afro-Caribbean community, but also other communities were there as well. And you mentioned that there was an Asian person in your engineering intake, your apprenticeship. I was just wondering if the groups of other ethnic minorities at that time were kind of uniting together, or was it still seems very separate?
Excellent question.
There was a commonality of you were a minoritized group of peoples. And so you had that in common. And I can remember, certainly in my case, Narinder Panisar was the other chap who was appointed at the same time as me, and we used to spend a lot of time together. In fact, we have become lifelong friends, and you know, I see him as often as I can because it's just it's wonderful just to reminisce about those times, you know, those times.
Thank you.
I mean, myself, I think I was the only one as a black person in the position I was in as a manufacturing engineer. There was loads of other black people there working on the shop floor. People like Sonny Challengers and Al's Akers and so forth, Earl King, all doing decent roles, you know, on the presses and so on. But in the position that I was in, there wasn't any other. There was one other guy that I remembered who worked in the drawing office. I think his name was David Bailey. And he was there for a while, and whatever reason he left. And Robert Norris.
Robert, yes.
Yeah, Robert. he used to look after the chemical plant, you know, set up the systems and so on for cleaning the blades and so on, you know. But you know, the job that I did, I don't know about other parts of the company because Doncaster was quite a big company, you know, worldwide, and yeah, but it was an interesting job.
Okay.
It was hard work, but it was interesting.
I think I'm going to be cheeky and not look at the people that are saying to me, wrap it up, and just not look at them and focus here. So there's one last question here. This hand go up here.
I guess my question would be, what advice would you give to the younger generation of Afro-Caribbean men and women who want to get into engineering, or I guess for myself, coming from the Caribbean and pursuing a career as a civil engineer, there's not many of us who are actually taking that path. So I guess my question is, what advice would you give to encourage more of us to get into the field and to stay in the field?
I'm not in engineering, but I think I know, I would say.
I suppose the first thing is basically study. You know, education is a great thing, you know. As my mother used to say, boy, learn your lesson. You know, so I think you've got to start there, you know, and put in the work, really. Yeah. And some of it is luck. But in my view, these days, it's a lot easier to get in if you really want to get into that field. It's just a matter of application.
Yeah. I mean, my advice would be this, that not just engineering, but whatever you choose to do it with passion. Make sure it's something you love. Make sure it's something you want to get up in the morning to go and do. Because you don't want to do a job because someone thinks it's a good idea. You want to do something that you really is interested in. Yeah. So I would say, whether it's engineering or anything else, just make sure you have a passion and you want to pursue that.
On that note, first of all, can we have a round of applause for our panel? Thank you so very much. I found it fascinating. There are just a few quick thanks to Smeaton 300, which is a Foxglove project by the creative directors Jane Earnshaw and Abby Dix-Mason, to Leeds City Council, to Leeds 2023, and to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, to Leeds Libraries, who have hosted us in this beautiful space, to everyone who shared their stories and memories of their fathers and their families as well. Thank you so much for bringing those stories back to us and making sure that they stay with us and stay in our memories and the history of the city. To the Yorkshire Copperworks and Doncaster Monkbridge Facebook groups, please join and look at that history that they've curated. To our panel, absolutely, Derek Armstrong, Hubert Condor, Des Walters, and to everyone who ever worked in engineering, no matter where you came from and where you made it happen, thank you. And I would like to do this. If you worked in engineering in this room, please stand. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And I want to say a special thank you. I want to say a special thank you to all of you that have taken the time to be with us, to share your memories, to even if you've not shared them here tonight, you've shared them in the background. I cannot leave without saying a very special thank you to those who went before, to those who persevered, those from those days in the RAF who were the trailblazers, who opened doors, who kicked down doors, who brought each other in, who paved the way for everybody that's in this room to enjoy the Leeds that we enjoy today. So Mr. Gardner, on behalf of that generation, I just want to say thank you for what you've done for all of us and for allowing us to be here today. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I think that's all that remains to be said. I'd love to stay here for ages, but this watch is calling time. And I want to tell you, this watch, that is the watch that my father was presented with for long service at Yorkshire Copperworks, says it's time for us to go. And as they say in Jamaica, walk good.